The judge reads the final order at 11:42 on a Tuesday morning in Tarrant County Family Court. The clinic, the investment accounts, the lake house outside Granbury. All of it to Renata Voss. Caleb Holt stands at the respondent's table without moving. His attorney touches his sleeve once. He does not respond. He picks up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walks the long aisle between the gallery benches, through the double doors, down the corridor, where the fluorescent lights hum against the linoleum, out the front entrance into the flat Texas January. There, in the loading zone directly in front of the courthouse steps, sits a black Escalade with a medical caduceus embossed on the rear window panel. Behind it, a second vehicle. And behind that, idling in the center of the road with hazard lights on, a medical transport van from Holt Regional, the name printed in clean navy letters along the side. Behind him, the courthouse doors opened. Renata stepped out with her attorney, Davis Wren, a man who had spent 11 weeks telling her the settlement was already guaranteed. She saw the van, she saw the logo. Her smile, the one she had been wearing since the judge began reading, went somewhere it could not come back from. Caleb did not look back. He walked to the Escalade. The door opened from inside. 6 hours earlier, the smell of bacon and burned toast in the kitchen of a rental house on Mockingbird Lane. Caleb at the stove in a gray Henley, scraping the bottom of the pan. Owen at the table in his school uniform, one shoe on, one shoe somewhere under his chair, telling his father about a project on ecosystems that was due Thursday and which he had not started. Caleb set the plate in front of him. Owen looked at the toast. It's dark. It has character. Owen ate it without further comment. Caleb tied the missing shoe. He tucked the permission slip for the field trip into Owen's backpack pocket. He zipped it up. He handed the backpack over. Owen put it on and stood up very straight, the way he always did when he was trying to look older than 7. "You coming home after?" Owen asked. "Couple hours. Joel's picking you up. We'll do dinner." "Can we do the taco place?" "Sure." Owen nodded with the gravity of a man who had just completed a difficult negotiation. Caleb drove him to school. He waited at the curb until Owen had gone through the double doors, and the doors had closed behind him. Then he sat in the car for a moment, hands on the wheel, and did not think about anything in particular. He called Petra on the drive. "Pick him up at 3. If I'm not back by 5, take him to dinner. Don't let him order the large." Petra had been the one who'd kept things running at Holt Regional for the last 3 years, back when Caleb was rebuilding from the ground up. She had also been Owen's emergency contact at school for 2 of those years when Renata's name was on the list, but Renata was rarely reachable. "I know," Petra said. "Go." Caleb parked 4 blocks from the courthouse. Indeed, he walked. Renata arrived in a white Audi borrowed from her sister. She wore a camel coat, the kind that required maintenance, and heels she had bought specifically for this morning. Davis Wren held the door. She carried herself like someone who had already received the news she wanted. They did not see Caleb enter through the service corridor. The courtroom was standard issue. Wood paneling, institutional lighting, the smell of old paper and coffee someone had brought in and left. Caleb sat at the respondent's table with his attorney, Simone Adler, a woman of 61 who had been practicing family law in Fort Worth for 30 years, and had a reputation for saying very little in courtrooms and winning anyway. She had given him clear instructions the night before. Do not contest the asset valuations. Do not offer testimony about the clinic. Fight only for Owen. He had listened without interrupting. The gallery held a court reporter from the Tribune, 2 law students from TCU doing an observation requirement, and an older man in the back who had fallen asleep before the judge entered. Judge Adira Lennox came through the side door at 10:07. She moved without ceremony, a woman in her early 50s, who had the particular stillness of someone who had stopped needing to perform authority because she had learned to simply carry it. She took her bench. She scanned both tables. Her eyes settled on Caleb for half a second longer than procedural neutrality required. Something in his composure seemed to register with her in a way she did not immediately catalog. Renata's testimony, which Davis Wren had shaped over 10 weeks, moved through the marriage efficiently. Shared sacrifice. Years given. A clinic Caleb had built during the marriage, using accounts to which she had contributed. A man who had been unreachable, emotionally and otherwise. Caleb did not contest a word of it. Adira looked at him. "Mr. Holt, do you wish to address the asset valuation of the clinic?" "No, Your Honor." She made a note. She had the same feeling she sometimes got in proceedings where one party understood something the court did not yet see. She had no ground to act on it. The custody argument was the only point where Caleb pushed back. Simone presented the record quietly: school pickup logs for the last 18 months, Owen's teacher communications, pediatric appointment records, a calendar of dates on which Owen had been marked absent from school pickup, and the corresponding emergency contact calls that had gone to Caleb, not Renata. Davis Wren objected to characterization. Adira overruled him with a look. She ruled. Renata received the clinic valuation, the investment accounts, the lake house. Caleb retained primary physical custody of Owen. Adira read the order in a level voice. She did not editorialize. She did not look at Caleb when she finished. He stood. He inclined his head. "Thank you, Your Honor." The words had no performance in them. They were simply accurate. He gathered his jacket and walked. Adira watched the empty aisle for a moment after the doors had swung shut behind him. The bailiff called the next case. She closed the file. She stood. She could not explain why the image of a man walking quietly out of a courtroom, where he had lost almost everything, was still sitting in her chest when she reached her chambers. The loading zone, the Escalade, the medical transport van with Holt Regional and Navy on the side. Renata stood at the top of the courthouse steps and processed what she was looking at. The name on the van, the Caduceus. The two men who stepped out of the Escalade to meet Caleb on the sidewalk. One of them in a suit that cost more than the Audi she had borrowed, the other carrying a document case with the Holt Regional letterhead embossed on the cover. Davis Wren put his hand on her arm. She did not feel it. Caleb reached the sidewalk. One of the men, Raymond Kessler, who ran the board of directors of Holt Regional's parent system and who had been trying to bring Caleb back into active leadership for 14 months, said simply, "The board met this morning. The Denver expansion is yours if you want it. Your terms." Caleb gave a short nod. From the corner of the block, Petra appeared. Owen's hand was in hers. He wore his school backpack and a look of concentrated curiosity at the large vehicles taking up the road. He spotted his father. He let go of Petra's hand. He ran. Caleb went to one knee on the sidewalk. Owen landed against his chest with the full commitment of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned to restrain momentum. Caleb's hand went to the back of Owen's head. "Dad, is that our van?" "It's a van. It has our name on it." "It does." Owen considered this. "Cool." Behind them, on the courthouse steps, Renata turned to Davis Wren. She said the name again. Holt. Holt Regional. The system with 12 facilities across Texas and New Mexico, and the new construction in Colorado she'd read about in the Tribune's business section 3 weeks ago, which had seemed irrelevant to her life at the time. Davis Wren had gone the color of uncooked dough. He had spent 11 weeks helping his client take apart the settlement position of a man whose name was on hospital wings in 2 states. Raymond turned toward the steps. His voice was pleasant and carried perfectly. "Mrs. Voss, you'll want to speak with a different attorney. Our forensic team is flying in Thursday." He did not raise his voice for what he said next. He did not need to. At the top of the courthouse steps, Adira Lennox had come out through the main doors with her briefcase. She stopped on the landing. She saw the van. She saw the name. She watched Raymond speak. She watched Renata's face go still in the particular way that faces go still when a person realizes they have made a significant error in judgment and the consequences are already in motion. Caleb stood with Owen on his hip and walked toward the escalade. He passed near the bottom of the granite steps. He looked up once, briefly, at Adira. She was looking directly at him. He paused for a moment. "Thank you for listening, Judge." He kept walking. Owen waved at Adira from over his father's shoulder with the uncomplicated friendliness of a child. Adira pressed her hand against the stone railing. She did not move for a long moment. The escalade pulled away from the curb. The medical van followed. The loading zone returned to ordinary. She walked to her car in the courthouse garage and sat without starting the engine for 7 minutes. She told herself she was thinking about the afternoon docket. The Fort Worth Tribune ran the story the next morning, not front page but close. A quiet paragraph about Caleb Holt, listed as a respondent in a family court proceeding the previous morning, and the Holt Regional System's announcement of its Denver expansion, which would represent the largest private medical infrastructure investment in Colorado in a decade. Adira read it in her chambers over coffee that had gone cold. The photograph showed a building with his name on it. She set the paper down. She went back to work. By noon, Davis Wren had filed a motion to vacate on grounds of asset concealment. Adira pulled the original disclosure filings. Caleb had declared the clinic at its liquid valuation. The Holt Regional Equity sat in a premarital medical trust his father had established when Caleb was 26, 2 years before the marriage. The trust produced no income to him personally because he had been reinvesting dividends for 8 years at the board's direction. Under Texas Family Code, premarital trust assets held in a third-party structure were separate property and did not require declaration. He had not lied to the court. He had disclosed what the law required and nothing more. She denied the motion in 9 minutes. In Denver, Caleb took Owen to see the construction site. Owen stood at the chain-link fence, looking at the excavation, and said it was the biggest hole he had ever seen. Caleb agreed that it was a significant hole. Owen asked if they could eat at a diner. They ate at a diner. Owen ordered pancakes at 2 in the afternoon and ate them with methodical satisfaction. Caleb drank coffee and watched his son and did not feel, for the first time in a long time, like a man bracing for something. He called Raymond from the hotel. That evening, he laid out his conditions. He would keep Owen in Fort Worth near his school and his routines. He would travel to Denver when the project required it, and not on any other basis. He would not give press interviews. He would not attend industry events or sit for the profile pieces the communications team had been pushing for. His name on the building was sufficient. His name on the building was already more than he had planned. Raymond accepted without negotiation. He had expected conditions. He had expected worse. Across the state, in Fort Worth, Davis Wren visited a colleague at another firm and tried to gauge what was coming. The colleague was polite and gave him nothing. He understood the shape of the situation. He did not want proximity to it. The recordings which Caleb's corporate security team had compiled over the course of the previous year would later tell a more complete story. Renata had not simply been unhappy in the marriage. She had been working with Davis Wren, a man she had been involved with personally for 14 months before the divorce filing, on a coordinated strategy to position her as primary stakeholder in the clinic before leaving. They had approached 2 of the clinic's minority partners with settlement offers. They had forged Caleb's signature on a loan modification that moved a portion of the clinic's equipment lease into a personally liable structure. They had done this, apparently, on the assumption that Caleb was a man of modest means who had built one good small business and could be managed accordingly. They had assumed incorrectly. On a Wednesday afternoon, a second filing arrived on Adira's desk. This one came from Simone Adler on Caleb's behalf. It was not a defense. It was a request for a fraud investigation into the loan modification, with 3 exhibits, a certified forensic handwriting comparison, a financial trail document, and a timeline of recorded communications between Renata Voss and Davis Wren, dating back 16 months. Adira read it twice. She said a hearing. In 2 weeks. She went home that evening and stood at her kitchen window with a glass of water and thought about a man who had walked down that long courthouse aisle without a word and thanked her for listening on his way out the door. It was not a thing she could explain to anyone. She did not try. 14 days later, Caleb came back to Fort Worth. He drove himself. Owen was in school. He wore the same gray Henley he had worn the morning of the first hearing. He parked 2 blocks from the courthouse and walked. In chambers before the proceeding, Adira met briefly with both attorneys. Davis Wren was sweating through a shirt that had been pressed that morning. Simone Adler had a folder on her lap and the quiet composure of someone who had already decided how the day would go. Adira kept her voice neutral. She outlined the scope of the hearing. She did not look at the door when Simone mentioned Caleb's name. The forensic evidence was not complicated. A certified examiner had compared Caleb's actual signature across 6 reference documents against the signature on the loan modification. The differences were marked in red on a side-by-side reproduction. An independent forensic accountant had traced the financial transfer from joint accounts into a private account in Renata's maiden name, beginning 22 months prior. Davis Wren argued chain of custody. He argued the forensic examiner had been retained by Caleb's counsel and was therefore compromised. He argued the financial trail was circumstantial. He had the voice of a man who understood he had already lost, but had not yet found a way to stop talking. Renata sat very still. At one point she closed her eyes. Caleb was asked to confirm that the signature on the loan modification document was not his. He looked at the exhibit. He looked up. His eyes met Adira's for a moment that lasted slightly longer than the proceeding required. "That is not my signature," he said. She wrote it down. She continued. At the break, Caleb sat in the courthouse cafeteria and ate half a sandwich. He opened his phone. He sent Petra a single message. "How is he?" She sent back a photograph. Owen in the school gymnasium, mid-air, participating in something that appeared to involve a jump rope and a great deal of personal ambition. Caleb set the phone face down on the table. He finished the sandwich. Adira ate lunch alone in her chambers. She found herself thinking about something that had happened in the Escalade that morning. Not that she had any reason to know about it, and she did not. She found herself thinking instead about the moment Owen had waved at her from over his father's shoulder. The small, uncomplicated gesture of a child who did not understand yet why adults found simple things difficult. She went back to work. The afternoon session was shorter than the morning. Adira delivered her ruling without preamble. Probable cause existed to believe that fraud had been committed within the marriage. The clinic valuation and the joint accounts would be restored pending the outcome of a criminal referral to the district attorney. The loan modification was voided. Davis Wren left the courtroom before she had finished the last sentence. Renata sat for a moment after the room had mostly emptied. Then she left, quietly, without the coat she had worn in January. That evening, Caleb stood in the parking lot behind the rental house on Mockingbird Lane and looked at the flat Fort Worth sky going dark. In the west, Joel came out and handed him a beer, and they stood without talking for a while. A radio somewhere inside was playing something from the 90s. Crouched. Miles away, in an apartment on the east side of the city, Adira sat at her kitchen table and looked at the glass of water she had poured and not yet touched. She had signed orders that had changed the direction of people's lives for 15 years. None of them had made her sit this still afterward. She picked up the glass. She set it down. She went to bed and lay there listening to the traffic on the street outside. The Tribune praised the ruling the following week. Adira gave no comment. Her name began appearing in conversations about the upcoming vacancy on the Fifth Circuit. She did not engage with those conversations. Renata came to the clinic one evening, 3 weeks after the hearing. Caleb was in the back office reviewing contractor estimates for the Denver site. The front desk had already closed. She knocked on the open door. She wore a jacket that had once been part of a good suit. Her hair was different. She looked, in a way that had nothing to do with cosmetics, like someone who had been somewhere difficult and had not entirely returned. "Did you know?" she said. "From the beginning. Did you know what I was doing?" He looked at her across the desk. "Not from the beginning. For about a year." She absorbed that. "Why didn't you stop it sooner?" "I was waiting to understand the shape of it. And I had Owen to think about." She looked at the wall behind him, where Owen had taped a drawing of a dinosaur 3 months ago, and Caleb had left it there. She started to say something. She did not. She left. Caleb locked the office. He drove home. Owen was already in pajamas, the ones with the small rocket ships, and had fallen asleep on the couch with a chapter book open on his chest. Caleb stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at him for a long moment. He picked the book up, found the page, folded the corner down carefully, set it on the side table. He carried Owen to bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress until the small breathing went even and slow. Then he sat in the chair in the corner. He thought about his father, who had built the first Holt clinic in a strip mall in Abilene, with 2 exam rooms and a folding table for a reception desk. His father had told him once, the year before he died, that the hardest thing about building something real was accepting that you could not protect it by holding on too tight. You had to let it be what it was and trust that was enough. Owen shifted in his sleep and pulled the blanket up around his chin. Caleb sat in the chair until the house was completely quiet. Miles across the city, Adira was on the phone with her brother, a civil engineer in Phoenix who called on the last Sunday of every month without. She was not listening closely to what he was saying. He noticed. "You're somewhere else tonight." "Long week. Is it the Holt thing?" She was quiet for a moment. "You're thinking about someone," he said. He said it simply, with the matter-of-factness of a person who had known his sister for 43 years. "It's not what you think," she said. "Tell me what it is." She didn't. She said she was tired. She said they'd talk next month. She hung up. She stood at the window. The street outside was quiet. A dog walker passed under the light. A car went through the intersection slowly. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The district attorney's investigation moved with the particular slowness of machinery that has interests inside it. Davis Wren's father sat on the county bar's advisory committee. He had friends. Friends, in certain county offices, can adjust the tempo of things. Caleb did not push. He trusted Simone. Simone trusted the federal record. Joel was the one who moved the timeline. On a Thursday morning, without announcing it to anyone in advance, Joel Ferris drove to the district attorney's office in his work truck and asked to speak with the lead investigator. He had an envelope under his arm that he had been carrying for 8 months. Joel had worked with Caleb since the first clinic. He had been the one who installed the security system in the back office years ago, the same system that had continued recording, after Renata had come in one afternoon the previous spring, when Caleb was in Dallas for a board meeting and had asked Joel to help her quietly remove a piece of equipment from the storage room. She had told him it was Caleb's, that Caleb had asked her to handle it, that there would be no problem. Joel had said no. He had said it pleasantly, in the flat way he had of declining things that did not feel right. That night he had reviewed the office security footage. The following week, he had bought a small digital recorder and begun keeping it in his jacket pocket when he was in the building. What he handed to the investigator now was 6 months of audio. Renata and Davis Wren, on 4 separate occasions in the clinic's back office and the adjacent storage corridor, discussing the structure of the loan fraud, a contact at the county assessor's office they had paid for a favorable appraisal, and a plan to approach one of the clinic's senior physicians with a buyout offer using forged documentation that would have transferred a controlling share of the clinic to Renata before the divorce was finalized. the case moved out of county. Caleb heard about it from Simone that afternoon. He was in the clinic's small break room when she called. He stood at the counter with his phone and did not speak for a moment after she finished. He drove to the supply warehouse where Joel spent most of his Thursdays doing inventory. He found Joel in the back, lifting a box of IV supplies onto a high shelf. "You held this for 8 months," Caleb said. Joel set the box down. "You had enough going on." "Joel, I was waiting for the right time." He looked at Caleb directly. "The right time was when it would help most. That's now." Caleb put his hand on the older man's shoulder. He did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying. The afternoon light came through the warehouse's high windows and made the dust in the air visible in long, pale shafts. The federal indictment came 3 weeks later. The case moved to Dallas. The witness list included Caleb, Simone, Raymond Kessler, and because of the motions she had ruled on before recusal became necessary, Judge Adira Lennox. She accepted the subpoena without objection. She recused from any further proceedings in the matter. She drove to Dallas on a gray February morning and testified briefly and precisely and drove back. By protocol, witnesses in federal proceedings involving connected civil cases are kept apart when possible. They were. Caleb had brought Owen with him to Dallas. He had not wanted a week away from him. A Holt regional assistant watched Owen at the hotel during the hearing hours. In the evenings, Caleb read to him, ordered room service, let him stay up 20 minutes past his normal bedtime because they were in a hotel, and that seemed like the kind of exception that warranted the privilege. On the third afternoon, both of them happened to exit through the courthouse's east corridor at the same time. The press had set up at the main entrance. Caleb had a security detail and a rear exit arranged. Adira did not. He stopped her at the east stairwell door. "My team can take you out the back." She looked at him. She looked at the door. She hesitated in the particular way of someone calculating whether a reasonable thing could be made unreasonable by context. "It's a car," he said. "That's all it is." She nodded once. She followed him. The drive took 25 minutes. They spoke with careful, surface-level ease. She had been reading a book on mid-century architecture. He had been following a renovation project in the Stockyards district. They discovered, mildly and without making anything of it, that they had grown up in adjacent towns in central Texas, 30 miles apart. Halfway through the drive, Caleb's phone buzzed. Petra had sent Owen over with the assistant so he could ride back with his father. The car stopped at a light. The assistant brought Owen in through the rear door. Owen climbed into the back seat, looked at Adira with the frank curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to disguise his interest in strangers, and said, "Are you a lawyer?" "I'm a judge." Dad said judges are the ones who listen. Adira glanced at Caleb. Caleb looked at his hands. Owen settled between them with the comfort of a child, accustomed to adults he has just met. He fell asleep before they crossed the bridge. His head slipped sideways. It came to rest against Adira's arm. She went still, then she shifted slowly so that he was more comfortable. Her hand settled on the seat between her and Caleb, palm down. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. He watched, without watching, the way she had adjusted for Owen without thinking. The unconscious care of it. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive. At her hotel, she opened the car door. "Good night, Mr. Holt." Meowed. "Caleb." She did not repeat the name. She nodded once and went inside. He told the driver to go after the lobby doors had closed behind her. He looked out the window at the street. Owen slept the whole way back. The jury in the federal case returned their verdict 6 weeks later. Davis Wren was convicted on 4 counts: fraud, conspiracy, bribery of a public official, and interstate wire fraud. Renata accepted a plea: restitution, supervised release, mandatory cooperation. The Tarrant County community, which had mostly assumed Caleb Holt was a quiet man who owned a clinic, recalibrated accordingly, with the particular collective awkwardness of people who realize they have been measuring someone with a broken instrument. Meuched. Caleb announced the Fort Worth expansion of Holt Regional, a new outpatient surgical center in the medical district, 80 permanent positions. He gave the announcement from the clinic parking lot in a 3-minute statement that he had written in the same pencil handwriting he used for everything. He did not take questions. He wore the gray Henley. The Fifth Circuit seat was formally offered to Adira in March. She requested 2 weeks to consider. She told her brother she might be too settled in Fort Worth. He said that was the most Texas thing she had ever said. She did not disagree. Caleb attended a community reception that spring at the Medical Association's annual gathering in the ballroom of a downtown hotel. First public appearance of any size. He saw Adira across the room near the east windows. She was speaking with a senior partner from a civil rights firm who had argued a case before her bench the previous year. Neither of them moved toward the other. For the entire length of the evening, each of them was aware of where the other was standing, with the particular low-frequency certainty that does not require looking. Caleb left first. He sat in his truck in the hotel garage for 9 minutes before he started the engine. He drove home. Owen was at Joel's for the night. The house was quiet. He made coffee he did not drink, and stood at the kitchen window and watched the light over the neighborhood go from blue to black. Owen's school held its spring showcase in the gymnasium on a Friday evening in April. Owen's class had been making model ecosystems out of cardboard and recycled materials for 2 months. Owen's entry was a model of a deep ocean floor, which he had constructed largely out of blue cellophane, aluminum foil, and a significant quantity of black paint. He had labeled each component in his careful, large-lettered handwriting. He had given the angler fish a name. Caleb sat in the third row of folding chairs on the west side of the gym. Adira's niece, the daughter of her sister from Austin, visiting for a long weekend, was in Owen's class. Adira had been drafted to accompany them. She sat on the east side, 2 rows back, and did not know until the overhead lights dimmed for the presentation that Caleb was in the room. Owen presented his ecosystem with the focused seriousness of someone who has spent 2 months on a thing and intends for that to be apparent. He described the angler fish with particular care. The audience, a gymnasium full of parents, siblings, and a few grandparents who had driven in for the occasion, laughed at something Owen said about deep-sea pressure. Owen accepted the laughter with dignity. From the east side of the gymnasium, Adira saw Caleb's face when Owen made the room laugh. She saw what happened in it, the particular way a parent's face opens when a child does something that makes them proud and also afraid of how fast time is moving. She recognized it. She had seen it in her own parents' faces, at moments she had not always understood until she was older. It caught in her chest in a way she chose, for now, not to examine. After the presentations, in the bright and crowded lobby, Owen found her first. He came through the crowd with confident navigation and stopped in front of her, with his ecosystem model under one arm. "You're the judge from the car." "I am." "Did you see my angler fish?" "I saw your angler fish. You named him." "Gerald," Owen said, "because he looks like a Gerald." Adira looked at the model. The angler fish, done in silver foil with a small paper lamp attached to its forehead, did, objectively, look like a Gerald. "I think that's exactly right," she said. Caleb arrived behind Owen at a measured distance, hands in his jacket pockets, not crowding the moment. "Judge Lennox." "Mr. Holt." They stood in the lobby traffic for a moment. Owen explained, to no one in particular, that the blue cellophane was actually quite difficult to get to lie flat. A challenge he had overcome through the application of many small pieces of tape, applied one at a time. "Would you want to get coffee?" Caleb said. "Sometime. The 3 of us." She thought about the case. She was no longer on it, but the federal record was still open at the appellate level. She thought about the Fifth Circuit offer. She thought about 15 years of reputation assembled carefully. The way you assemble something you intend to last. When the appeal closes, she said. He nodded. He did not push. He took Owen's hand. They left. She watched them go through the lobby doors. She stood there for a moment after they had gone. Her niece appeared at her elbow. Who's that? Someone from a case. Her niece looked at the doors. She looked at Adira. She said nothing, which was, Adira thought, unusually perceptive for a 9-year-old. The appellate ruling came down 6 weeks later. Wren's conviction was affirmed on all counts. The civil matter was closed. The Holt file was finished. Caleb sent a note, handwritten, on plain paper, in the same pencil script. He and Owen had a standing Saturday breakfast at a diner on Magnolia Avenue at 8:30, no pressure either way. She came. Owen was already in the booth when she arrived. He was drawing on a paper placemat with a crayon the diner had provided. He was drawing what appeared to be a submarine, but which he explained was actually a whale that had a lot of windows. Adira slid into the booth. Caleb handed her a menu. Owen explained that the pancakes were very good, based on extensive personal research conducted over several previous visits. He ordered the pancakes. He ate them with the focused pleasure of a child who takes breakfast seriously. Between bites, he narrated a story about something that had happened at recess, involving a basketball, a misunderstanding, and an eventual resolution that he described as basically fair. Adira laughed, genuinely, openly, the kind of laugh that surprises the person laughing. Her hand came up briefly to cover her mouth. Caleb said almost nothing. He drank his coffee. He watched Owen describe the recess situation with the gestures of a natural storyteller. He watched Adira's face when she laughed. From a table near the window, Joel sat with his newspaper and a cup of black coffee. When the three of them stood to leave, he looked up once, caught Caleb's eye, gave one small nod, and went back to his paper. Outside, the April morning was warm and already bright. Owen took Adira's hand on the sidewalk the way he took hands, simply and without announcement, as if it were an obvious thing to do when you were walking somewhere, and there was a hand available. Caleb walked a step behind them, hands in his pockets. Adira felt something shift in her chest, not like a door opening, but like a window, which is different because it lets in air. She did not name it. She did not need to. May came to Fort Worth. The construction on the surgical center went vertical, the steel frame rising in sections above the medical district. Caleb drove past it on Thursday mornings on the way to school drop-off. Owen had developed an opinion about construction cranes. He shared this opinion regularly and in detail. Hattie's invitation, except it was Owen's, scrawled on a paper napkin at the diner on a Saturday in early June, written in the large, careful letters of a child who has recently learned that handwriting can be a form of declaration. He wrote, "Dinner at our house, Sunday, July 6 at 6. You should come," and signed it with his full name, Owen Elliott Holt, because the occasion seemed to warrant formality. Adira came, and Caleb cooked. He had a recipe on the counter, open to a page that was already splattered with what appeared to be olive oil and one small orange drip of tomato paste. The kitchen smelled good in the way kitchens smell when someone is trying hard and it is mostly working. The pasta was slightly overdone. The sauce had a complexity that may have emerged from a near miss at a critical moment. Owen declared it perfect. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Owen chose the movie with the decisive authority of the person who lives there. It was one he had seen before, which meant he watched the others watching it more than he watched the screen. He fell asleep between them 20 minutes. Before the end, his feet warm against Adira's leg, his head on his father's arm. Caleb carried him upstairs. He came back down. Adira was at the front window in the dark living room, looking out at the city. The lights on Magnolia Avenue made a pale amber line through the glass. He stood behind her. He did not touch her. "They offered me the Fifth Circuit seat," she said, "based in New Orleans. I would need to decide in the next 2 weeks." A pause. I told them I needed more time to think. Caleb said nothing for a moment. Then, whatever you decide, I'll respect that. She turned. She looked at him. The room was dim. She could see the edge of the light from the street, catching the line of his jaw. I think I'm going to decline, she said. He did not ask why. He understood. The understanding was simple and complete and required no words. He walked her to the door. He held her coat for her. Not as a performance, just as the natural action of someone who has a coat and a door and knows what to do with both. He opened the door. The June air came in, warm and soft, carrying the distance and sound of someone's lawn sprinkler clicking in a slow arc down the block. Good night, Adira. The first time, no title, just the name. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Good night, Caleb. She drove home. At a stoplight on Magnolia and 5th, she put her hands on the steering wheel and noticed they were unsteady. She sat in that for a moment. She did not find it alarming. She found it, against all of her professional training in the maintenance of composure, something close to a relief. She let herself into her apartment. She poured a glass of water. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the street for a long time. The next morning she walked into the courthouse and submitted her formal decline of the Fifth Circuit nomination. She gave no public reason. 3 weeks after that, she submitted her resignation from the bench effective at the close of the term. She had been practicing law for 17 years. She had been deciding what other people's lives should look like for 12 of them. She thought it might be time to do something else. She did not announce what that would be. She did not need to yet. 1 year, almost exactly. From the morning the Holt Regional van had sat in the courthouse loading zone in the flat January light, Caleb stood at a podium outside the completed surgical center in the medical district. The building was smaller than the ones his father had built later, but it was solid and new and bore his family's name in the same clean navy letters he had carried forward from everything that had come before. He spoke briefly. He had written it himself, revised it twice, and read it once to Owen the night before. Owen had said it was good, and then asked if they could have cereal for breakfast the next morning, which Caleb took as a sign of genuine approval. He talked about his father. He said his father had built things not to be known for them, but because the building was the point, the doing of it, the service of it, the fact of it existing in the world when you were done. He said he had not understood that completely until he was standing in a situation that required him to choose between what looked like winning and what actually mattered. He said the choice had not been as hard as he had expected. He thanked Joel, who was in the front row, going slowly the color of a sunset, and who later described the experience as a lot. He thanked the city of Fort Worth for letting him be ordinary first. He did not mention Adira, but she was there, standing at the back of the gathered crowd, near the aisle, in the coat she had worn the previous January. Next to her, Owen stood with his small hand in hers, and her hand around his, and he was watching his father at the podium with an expression that was not yet pride but was the shape of something that would become it. After the speech, at the small reception under the tent the event team had put up against the June heat, Caleb walked over with 2 cups of coffee in paper cups. He handed one to Adira. Owen stood between them. He was wearing his good shoes and a collared shirt and had accepted both without complaint, which Caleb had privately noted as evidence of either character development or strategic patience. The coffee was bad. They drank it. She would have liked this, Caleb said. My father. He would have liked all of this. What was he like? Stubborn, careful, very bad at accepting compliments. He looked at her. Owen has the same thing. Owen, from between them, said, I accept compliments fine, with the tone of someone who has been monitoring the conversation and choosing his moment. Adira laughed. Caleb laughed. Owen accepted this as appropriate recognition. The afternoon light was long and warm over the new building. From across the tent, Joel raised his coffee cup once in Caleb's direction, and then turned to talk to the contractor beside him. Caleb looked at Adira. She looked back at him. Owen held both their hands, one on each side, with the placid confidence of a child who has decided something and is simply waiting for the adults to catch up. Caleb reached over and tucked a strand of hair back from her face. The gesture was quiet. He did not make anything of it. She did not move away. The three of them stood there in the long summer light, the paper coffee cups cooling in their hands, the sound of the city moving around them the way it always had and would keep doing. Steady and indifferent and, in that particular moment, exactly right. I keep thinking about the morning Caleb drove Owen to school before walking into that courtroom. He tied the shoe. He tucked the permission slip into the backpack pocket. He zipped it up. That's the part that stays with me. Not the hospital wing, not the federal conviction, not the moment Renata saw the name on the van. The zipper. Because a man who is thinking only about winning doesn't stop to zip up a backpack. A man who is thinking about his son does. I've come to believe that how we behave when we're losing tells the truth about us in a way that nothing else can. It's easy to be decent when things are going your way. It costs nothing. But Caleb sat in that courtroom and gave up the clinic and the accounts in the lake house without a single word of protest, not because he was weak, but because he understood something that Renata and Davis Wren never did. That the only thing worth fighting for in that room was Owen. Everything else could be rebuilt. A child's sense of security, once broken, is harder to repair. He knew that. He chose accordingly. That's not passivity. That's a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on any financial disclosure form. And then there's what Joel did. 6 months of recordings in a jacket pocket. 6 months of going to work every day, doing the inventory, lifting the boxes, saying nothing, while carrying something that could have changed everything if he'd used it too early, or too late, or for the wrong reasons. He waited until it would help most. That kind of patience, the kind that isn't resignation, but is actually a very deliberate form of action, is one of the hardest things I know of. Most of us can't hold something that long without letting it burn us, or letting it go. Joel held it steady. What the three of them built in that story, Caleb, Owen, Adira, didn't happen because things went right. It happened because each of them kept going when things went wrong, and kept going in a way that didn't require them to become someone they weren't. Caleb didn't lie. He didn't retaliate. He didn't perform his own suffering for the benefit of an audience. He just kept being the father Owen needed. One permission slip and one burned piece of toast at a time, until the world caught up to who he actually was. I think about Adira at that kitchen window. Her hand trembling after she'd driven home from Caleb's house, laughing at herself in the rearview mirror, 37 years old, and shaking because of a man who hadn't said one decisive thing. She'd spent 15 years building a reputation for composure, and here she was, undone by a quiet supper and a child who fell asleep between them. But she didn't run from it. She sat in that feeling long enough to understand what it was telling her. Then she made the harder choice. The Fifth Circuit, the career, the version of herself she'd always been building toward. And she let it go, not out of impulsiveness, but out of a kind of earned clarity about what actually mattered. That's the thing I keep coming back to. None of them were reckless. They were patient and honest and willing to absorb the cost of doing things the right way, even when the wrong way was right there and available. And in the end, the cost turned out to be a lot less permanent than they'd feared, while the things they protected by paying it, Owen's security, their own integrity, the slow, quiet possibility of something real, turned out to matter more than anything they'd given up. No, doesn't fall on people who deserve it. It just falls. But the three of them were standing in it together, and none of them had planned that, and somehow that made it exactly right.